Hello, creatives, community, and kind folks. Welcome to this Monster Monday on RPG with DBJ. I am your host, DBJ, and welcome to the channel. This week, and just to give you a little, let's get our, um, various topics out of the way. First of all, this channel is broadcast on Twitch, YouTube, and our Discord server, the audio at least. And to facilitate that, you may participate in the show live on either three of those platforms, as well as the fact that we take a subject and we will talk about that subject all week long. And we will subdivide it, today being Monster Monday. And of course, we have other thematic alliterations going on the rest of the week. Discord Tuesday, World Building Wednesday, Third Pillar of Exploration Thursday, and of course, Future Friday. And a subject that was given to us by those who joined the Discord server, and a couple of topical elements came up, and I thought I would combine them together. Now, if you've seen the thumbnail or the metadata for this show, you will notice that this week we're going to talk about the Orc Uprising, and flavored as to, like, is it a revolution or terrorism when the orcs uprise? Now, for those who don't know, the classic race, monster race known as the orcs, have been brought to the forefront because of things happening socially in and around our society. And of course, it has impacted our RPG content that we absorb. And one of the things I normally don't like to, read out a lot of blurbs or articles or things like that. And as a matter of fact, I really try to even stay away from doing a lot of research before the show, because I prefer you guys to submit your comments and questions and all those kind of things to the to the show. And one of the things that has come up recently is this parallel between our real world and the fictional race of orcs. And yes, I absolutely could bring that up. Dead Man brings up the movie Blight, Bright, on Netflix, that will probably be very topical, I think, for today and the rest of the week. But Dungeons and Dragons has put out an article, and I'm not going to read the entire thing. So I want to let you know that I am specifically like picking one specific thing out. So just to be aware, just go to dnd.wizardsofthecoast.com and look up an article that is pretty much posted on the front page, diversity and Dungeons and Dragons, and this is posted on the 17th of June. All right, so I'm going to read this out, and this is going to be a preamble for what we're going to talk about, because I figured we could talk about this subject in the setting of Dungeons and Dragons, right? So what I mean by that is not necessarily talking about it from the point of view of us, but given that Dungeons and Dragons and a lot of fantasy games are a living world, what happens? How do we reconcile the monstrous goblinoid race known as the orcs coming into and being embraced in its all fits and starts and problems and things like that within the setting of fantasy itself, as if we are speaking or looking through the eyes of the orcs and the roaming knights and wizards and gnomes and halflings and all those kind of things, like from their point of view, both ancestrally, in the past up until now, historically, through knowledge and things, like how would they react and what kind of stories could we tell doing that? And maybe, just maybe, because it is role-playing games, maybe we will come to some sort of conclusions based on in-game things that are happening, using elements from our what's happening outside the game, the meta portion. So I'm going to read this before I get back into the chat. Again, I am curtailing this article. It's a little bit long. One part says one of the explicit design goals of fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons is to depict humanity in all its beautiful diversity by depicting characters who represent an array of ethnicities, gender identities, sexual orientations, and beliefs. We want everyone to feel at home around the game table and to see positive reflections of themselves within our products. Human, in quotes, in D&D means everyone, not just fantasy versions of Northern Europeans, and the D&D community is now more diverse than it's ever been. Throughout the 50-year history of D&D, some of the peoples in the game, orcs and drow being two of the prime examples, have been characterized as monstrous and evil, using descriptions that are painfully reminiscent of how real-world ethnic groups have been and continue to be denigrated. That's just not right, and it's not something we believe in. Despite our conscious efforts to the contrary, we have allowed some of those old descriptions to reappear in the game. We recognize that to live our values, we have to do an even better job in handling these issues. If we make mistakes, our priority is to make things right. So that article, and mind you, like I said, I pulled a chunk out of it, has been given a little bit of an uproar. There's some, YouTube videos out there about it, and unfortunately, and this is just from personal experience, some things came across some of my social media feeds, which were people would pretty much like set their flag on another hill that I felt a little bit reprehensible. One of them that I can't even find any longer was one that basically stated like Dungeons and Dragons was made historically from European white people, and it was written this way, and white people were playing the game. If you want to include all that stuff, go find your own game, right? And one of the things, especially when we talk about orcs and history, and funny thing is, I did try to do some research on this. That orcs are still, despite the other races, playable races in Dungeons and Dragons and other fantasy games, are still depicted as, and even written in as, monsters in many of the games, especially from the first edition or first AD&D book, Monster Manual, heading out towards today. And a lot of the common races, like in the beginning, in the Monster Manual, they actually had listed as monsters, like halflings and dwarves and things like that, essentially NPCs. And a lot of them have moved on to the back of books where they're more or less NPC encounters rather than monster encounters. When you talk about like elves and human bandits and knights and barbarians and things of that nature. But when you open up a monstrous book of many types, they will list monstrous races in there. And there is this contention that orcs themselves are a depiction of brown and black races, mongoloid races, but various cultures from around the world. But I will contend to you, before we get into talking about orcs and things, I will contend to you that much of what we're going to talk about we've actually already gone through the fits and starts of this, and then come out on the other side of it using another gaming system. And since we have precedent, I think we can use, much like a lawyer, we can use precedent from other things that we've come to a certain conclusion on and deal with, like the idea of like drow and orcs and other monster-styled races that we use in our games. Cameron says, as a non-straight person, inclusion has always been my favorite part of D&D. As a matter of fact, one argument has always been that you can include or not include anything you want at your gaming table, right? If you are non-binary, of talking about sexuality, whether you want to include various types of what we would consider disabilities in your game or not, races in your game or not, or something, there are no RPG police out there. You can listen. When I know when I was a kid, when I was in my teens, and such. We did some pretty reprehensible things at our gaming table, right? Because we're just stupid and young, dumb, and full of hormones. Yeah, that's it. Um, yeah, Dead Man says fourth edition was the first edition that didn't have humans in the monster manual, and this is where I think I want to pivot more towards an in-game look at like the orc problem, like the orc uprising problem. Okay, so from the early years, way before our ancestors' time, there have been half orcs. Okay, and we know that in their first iterations of half orcs in the Dungeons and Dragons game, that their origins didn't come from, I'll say, socially acceptable uh, processes. It was never quite written in, but there was an assumption that half orcs came from assault and violence by these rampaging monsters, and having taken from a lot of fiction, and when talk about fiction, I'm talking like Lovecraft and Edgar Rice Burroughs and the Age of Exploration novels. A lot of them had like your Savage Men, your Monster Men, your J.R.R. Tolkien and other things. Yep, they were the monstrous other, the unknown, the humanity was the core, and everything else orbited around that as you went out into the wild. And like Deadman says, all other races were in the monster manual. And I remember reading first monster manual, or having it actually, and the other races, the other playable races, were listed as, well, monsters. And included in those monster manuals were stereotypical depictions of them, like a generalization. Hey, if you encounter these things out in the wild, going on these adventures, here's in general what they would be like. And yeah, I hear you, Tesla. Yeah, Tesla's like, oh, that must have been when humans stopped being monsters. Wink, right? Like, when have human beings ever stopped being monsters at all? Um, we can count ourselves. I know this. We'll talk about Dungeons and Dragons and fiction and stuff, but whenever we need to figure to like pull on a thread of like, I wonder what's the most monstrous things people have done to society. The only thing we have to pull from is ourselves, and we're pretty damn brutal. I mean, we actually have whole industries, and have had and continue to have industries related to that. Hey, blind, hey, legally blind lurker, what's going on? You're not lurking around here, sir. You are, or kind person, you are here with the rest of us. Yep. Yeah, yep. From dumb humans to cunning, conniving humans. We're pretty bad. Cameron says, I personally include everyone in my games fully represented by NPCs because I never know who I could have at my table. And people variety makes me happy. So am I. Right? Sorry, just haven't been able to talk about this yet. I think every race has the ability to be good and evil and play them as such, even demons. Now, here's a weird thing that I think, when I say weird, because of this orc uprising problem and Dungeons and Dragons making a point, I am going to guesstimate that the majority of people out there playing Dungeons and Dragons are going, what are you talking about? Humans are humans, orcs are orcs. I never considered, from my own point of view, I'm going to use myself as an example. Like, I've never considered like black people or African Americans to be orcs. It's stupid. Like, I've never even heard of such a thing. I'm thinking the majority of people out there have never even the fact that we're bringing it up, myself included, right now, are thinking to themselves like, that's not even a thing. Like, I hadn't even considered it. And I was going to hold this off. I'm going to talk about it now. We've already discussed this before, and we've already have historical precedent on this. And I'm going to bring up something that you guys already know about, and that is the game system and all the things related to it. Call of Cthulhu, Lovecraftian horror. Okay, Um, it's been around since its inception as far as literature and role playing games, and yet we accept it in the role playing game community. We don't have any hate for it. People play the game all the time, and here's what I mean. We all agree that yeah. Oh yeah, oh, and Omen says exactly what I'm going to say. Lovecraftian is kind of racist considering his creator. Oh, no doubt. We we all agree collectively that the writers during that time, Conan and the Lovecraftian horror and that age of exploration of pretty much like American and Eurocentric exploration, they were pretty friggin' they were ultimate racists, like meaning like um they pretty much despised anybody that wasn't of a particular uh status related to themselves, including their own people. Like, if, I mean, they had a lot of of like internal status hate for each other as well. You know, to the point where they were just like, ship the lower folk away from us and ship them to some far off place. Like, I don't know, what did they say? Australia? That's at the edge of the world. Ship them over there, right? That was a thing at that time. I'm generalizing myself, so blame me as well. Yep. Omen says, I know, for instance, that some English look down on Italians and French. Oh yes. Oh yes. And we know this. Hey, Red Dice. Red Dice says, we know from H.P. Lovecraft's writing that he was petrified of bloodlines being intermingled. That was a thing as well, that there was air quote scientific reasoning for not mixing the Mongoloid blood, which was pretty much everything beyond their front door, right? At those times. And like Cameron brings up the point, is the work racist just because of the writer? My screen just went out. Is the work just racist just because of the writer? I don't get being mad at Harry Potter because J.K. Rowling has twisted views. And that's where we're getting to a thing. We've already encountered this because all of us can all agree that, hey, listen, Lovecraft and Edgar Rice Burroughs and all these people, like we can't stand their views, and we can even separate those rather small-minded views away because we've advanced as a culture and race and species, and still embrace the still embrace the creativity that was created and that kind of stuff. Right, like Legally Blind Lurker says, Lovecraft was a great writer, but a horrible human being. Exactly. So, How does that relate to what we're talking about now with orcs and drow and that kind of thing? Um, we can. I think it's okay for us to say, you know what? Starting today, we can change our minds and still accept that these things were written from the past. Right? We don't need to delete those things. So, because I've always been of the mindset that you should never delete history. Um, Destroying a history, rewriting history. Part of that comment in the Dungeons and Dragons, which is the Coast Dungeons and Dragons diversity thing, is that they want to go back and take out elements of things that are so that when it gets reprinted, it'll have this new updated information. Right. And Red Dice says, if you delete history, you can't learn from the mistakes made. I'm I'm a proponent of not deleting history. Now, do I think that you should put like messages and updated information next to it? You know, the box with the big red lines around it going, "Hey, listen, this is depicting things in a horrible way. We want you to know that it was that as we think of things currently, we don't agree with what's going on, but here it is nonetheless." I'm for that. Much like I said, we've already been through this. Much like all the Lovecraftian age of exploration stories that we've read and we continue to read and have influenced Dungeons and Dragons till this day. We know this already, and we're complex people. We're not simple minded. We can separate the two. But let's go into the world. Some of us have even thought of the monster manuals as being a real thing in our Dungeons and Dragons world, right? Where a sage has written a book that actually depicts these races, and someone could actually open up a huge tome and scan through and go to Orc, and listed under Orc it says chaotic evil. And what by that term, we know that even, what was that, the module B2, B1 or B2, Keep on the Borderlands. If anybody remembers that adventure, there's a part in that game from way back in the 80s that had a situation where the player characters would go into the caves of chaos, slaughtering all the goblinoids, and in there are the children and the pregnant, pregnant orc women. And how many times have we heard of that? It's the Dungeons and Dragons version of the trolley problem, right? Hey, my paladin, lawful good paladin that can detect evil. This is back in the day before 5th edition, when paladins did that. They detected good and evil. They could detect evil, go into a cave, and one player would go, well, of course I'm going to kill them. I don't care. They're chaotic evil. That's what the monster manual says, right? And yet, on the other hand, there are people who are like, no, it's the culture they're raised in. If they're not raised in that culture, why do we have half orcs that aren't chaotic evil? And that's where we have that conflict, because as many of the as many of the races moved from monstrous races over into player character races, slowly and surely, some of them are left behind. Drow were left behind. Orcs have been left behind as listed as monsters that the adventuring party will encounter, rather than, say, dwarves being some kind of monstrous race, or elves being some kind of monstrous race that the goodly people will encounter out there in the wild. Now I'm going to get back into the chat before we move on. Let's see. Cameron says the Call of Cthulhu community seems like it's wholly seems like it wholly rejects racism from my perspective. I haven't played in or seen a game where racism was a thing, even playing in a period. Most games, playing in a period of time, right? I get it, because you only had so many characters. I completely agree with you. I know for a fact there are many people that play Call of Cthulhu and playing back in the 1920s, and don't treat people of color, women, certain people of certain religions, Jewish and beyond, treating them horribly, but they still play the game, right? He says most games say no in session 0. Exactly. And now, mind you, I'm sorry, I'm going to continue with a lot of these comments that are made, like Omen and Red Dice. But I will say that because we're playing role-playing games, I think something that we are missing, and I think this is a terrible thing, because we are mature individuals. We are mature as a humanity, that role-playing games allow us to temporarily engage in situations that aren't nice and wrapped with a bow, that aren't necessarily things that we would prefer to experience, right? But we can still experience them anyway, whether it is sexism, racism, religious hatred, um, uh, hatred due to status or birth or bloodline or language spoken or length of hair, those kind of things. I mean, yeah. Like Legally Blind Lurker says, you know, um, those who forget history are bound to repeat it, and I think we are seeing that today over and over again. Yeah, Legally Blind says you're going back to a time when Elf was a class circa 82, where Keep on the Borderlands came out. I sure am. I sure am. And given the age of that period of time, all the way till now, orcs, goblins, heck, even bugbears, as well as say some of these other quote unquote evil races like tieflings and such, dragonborn, have moved into the player character arena, And once they've gotten into the player character arena, we know for a fact that, like, I'm going to play myself a lawful good dragonborn paladin. I'm going to play a tiefling that's a neutral good. And we accept these things. But now that the orcs have come about, one of the contentions is, well, who becomes the big bad guy? Who becomes the nameless humanoid beast that we don't mind slaying? There's a good reason for having an enemy of that type. And I think one of the contentions will be, well, who do we fight, right? Yeah, Red Dice is like undead, yeah. Undead masses, maybe undead fit in there. Some there's what are those the little tiny demons or devils? Um lemurs, whatever they're called. Maybe you could throw them in there. I think I think there's a place for having the born evil. Yeah, yeah. I've always called her lemurs, but I some people might pronounce them differently. Um, I think in role playing games there is a place for having something that is um, created to be evil without us having the problems of having something that isn't biologically inherently evil. Yeah, Deadman says, or going into Munchkin, where class, race, and gender can easily be changed. And mind you, we've always listen, just like Cameron's talking about, we've been changing things since the beginning of time, right? Since we've been home brewing things, we've been changing things all the time. You know, not a big deal. Omen says, uh, yeah, Omen says, like, also note that in Titanic, there were people who wanted to evacuate according to class. As a matter of fact, in the Titanic, there were people like the cruise ship itself. People were placed on different levels of the cruise ship based on their status, their class, and a lot of those people died that were trapped in the bottom because those cages were cages. There were doorways that were locked to prevent the lower folk from going up into the upper folks region. And so a lot of those people had died because of that fact, and because they didn't want to unlock the doors. Um, yeah, and Omen goes on to say, if we're going to discuss classism as well, paladins should always be last because they must embody what is good. Yeah, they say that. Yeah. Um, Cameron says, true. In some ways, I can see mature themes like racism could be effective in a game, but so often games are humorous, and it doesn't seem like there is much place for it when there is other drama to use. I agree. I agree. There, one of the issues is that when we start talking about, like, specifically the orc problem, and them being listed in monster manuals as chaotic evil. And of course, I know there's other goblinoids. You guys know I talk about goblinoids all the time, right? And is that chaotic evil? There's two reasons for the chaotic and evilness to be listed there, okay? Or maybe even three reasons. And depending on where you fall with the one of those three reasons that I just came up with, um, really depends on how you depict them. So, reason one, are they biologically inherently evil, no matter what happens? Because there are people who exist today that, were they to see me, assume that I, a black person living in the United States, is inherently bestial, criminalized. Like, there is an inherent nature in me biologically that makes me that way. And there are people who truly believe that. So, would you say that orcs are biologically inherently evil? Or number two, that the culture that they exhibit on their own out there in the wild is inherently chaotic and evil? Or three, that none of that is real, but the rest of humanity just assumes because they're different, they are chaotic and evil, right? And my contention is that Dungeons and Dragons is working towards this thing where outsiders look at them because they're different and then identify them as being chaotic and evil when as a monolith they are not, right? but but then you have to rationalize, okay, well, if that's not the case, are there pockets of groups where they are that way? For those of you that know about, like, I know nothing about Viking culture, but I've seen the show Vikings. I know that's a poor excuse for such a thing, but everybody had their own personalities, and some groups were far worse than others. And to lump everybody together as one to make them a monolith is basically the nature of what racism is, right? All those people are that way, so that kind of stuff. Um, Omen says, "I'm actually surprised that D&D isn't going to change the class system. It's two classes, wouldn't you agree?" It is a little bit. I don't. They'll never get rid of it though. But yeah, it's a bit like that. Yeah. Yep. And see, oh, Omen. Oh, I'm keeping that comment. Um, because I'm going to get into that just in just a minute. Um, Blind Lurker says, "Monster races ever find diversity. Oh, never find diversity until being made a player class. Starfinder makes undead a player race as there is an undead planet." Yeah, you're right about the, like, monster races never find diversity until being made a player character race. And orcs right now, unlike the other races, are straddling that line, right? Oh, the monster manual says they're chaotic evil, but then Volo's guide and other things are make them a player character race. So am I playing a one-off? And that has its own, from my personal experiences, um, being a black person in the United States, it brings its own racism, viewed as racism from my point of view and not racism from the other side. Um, as a personal example, if someone says to me, "Oh, you seem pretty educated," or you seem like a really nice guy, and end those sentences with "for a black person" or "for African American," from my point of view, is hideously racist, because it brings to mind, oh, well, you're one of the good ones. It's tokenism, right? You're one of the good ones because all the other ones suck. And then, so of course that puts in my mind, okay, so you're saying I'm okay, but my parents are like animalistic and brutal, you know. Yeah. Omen's like, "You seem very nice for a government employee. You don't seem like you're going to go crazy, bring an automatic weapon to work. That's pretty cool of you." Yeah. uh, doom. You get a good one there, Omen. Um, Yeah. Anyway, Red Dice says, "I've always seen the alignment as more like guidelines. To paraphrase Pirates of the Caribbean. Um, yeah, AD&D second edition Monster Manual lists orcs as lawful evil. I presume that this means their society generally leans towards that, but it's not 100% the case. I thought it was hobgoblins that they were at one point were lawful evil and the orcs were chaotic evil or something. I don't. They've changed from book to book, because if you guys remember, I'm an old grognard. I remember when drow were listed as chaotic evil, and then they became lawful evil and such. Yep. And Deadman says, yeah, the second edition DMG explains how societal alignments work. And mind you, again, the alignment has always been a guideline, but I'm going to challenge you guys, because I agree with you, but I'm going to challenge you guys on saying alignment as a guideline. Then in many ways you're saying that whether chaotic evil, lawful evil, if you're applying evil to a culture, from which opinion are you saying it? Now I'm going to go to the comment that Omen made here in the Discord. He says, "I will also say that people might say Aztec culture as evil because of its focus on human sacrifice," right? So is, depending on who you are, on a personal level, will you consider the Aztec culture evil if they do human sacrifices? Because I guarantee you that culture will look at your culture, no matter what culture you have around the world, and find something in it during that time period and go, oh, we're not evil because we're trying to keep the gods appeased. That's why we do human sacrifices. You're just human sacrificing because you don't like the person next to you, right? They and so are we to assume that orc culture is evil, or orc culture is evil based on some kind of baseline that humanity has, right? And so I think that's where the contention is. That's where the headbutting is. That's where we're coming into the point where it's like, okay, well, does that mean that the orcs are displaying things that the common that common, like the language, common folk view as evil, um, but they really aren't? And what behavior is that? Yep. Yeah, Red Dice says, I've just checked it, dude. It's lawful evil in AD&D second edition Monster Man. I was surprised myself. I thought it was chaotic evil. Okay, all right. I stand corrected. I didn't have my flag planted down on the hill anyway. I couldn't remember which ones because from I remembered the goblinoids, bugbears, goblins, hobgoblins, orcs, a few others as being as representing each of the evil alignments. That's where I got it from. Some were like neutral evil, some were chaotic evil, some were lawful evil. I couldn't remember. Red Dice goes on to say, I've always believed alignments were based on the human's perspective because they're often portrayed as the most populous, numerous, or baseline race. Exactly. So if there is a baseline culture, whatever that societal perspective is, and orcs are considered lawful evil, then there's something in their culture that the baseline of humanity considers to be evil. And then that would have to be a societal thing rather than a personal thing, such as, for example, let's say they have, okay, here's an example. Much like, because I want to make this even throw a further monkey wrench in this. In the movie Black Panther and the culture of the Wakandans in Black Panther, they have a battle for who will be, the king. Maybe is that considered evil to have a fight to, fight to the first blood, or even a fight to death? If it comes to that, do people consider that to be the evil part? What I'm saying here is basically, like, there's a possibility, much like we embraced Call of Cthulhu and Lovecraftian horror, and still throw away the other heavily racist ideals. I think there's a way for us to say, okay, you know what? The common society may not approve of what the orcish culture is doing, but they are, and the common people would not necessarily engage in those behaviors and still not consider them to be worthy of genocide, right? Oh, they're evil, let's go and kill them, right? And kill their babies, that kind of thing. Red Dice says, I've always thought of it in the same way that there are societies in the real world that have practiced cannibalism. Most civilized societies see that as an evil thing, but it might be a religious, sacred thing to a certain societies and not viewed by as evil by them. Yes, I absolutely agree with you. And so for me to rationalize how orcs now are being pulled into the crossing the line of like monster race over into player character race and still retain the orcishness of them, it could just be like you're saying. It could be that they practiced, or a section of their society has practiced a certain way of life that another part of that society is like, well, we don't do that anymore. We don't cast it aside. That's our culture, but maybe we just don't do those kind of things anymore. Can we say our own modern society could be viewed that way? Here in the United States was built on lots of slavery, and while people today could say, well, I don't own slaves and I don't have anything to do with that, people from the outside might say, sure, but it wasn't that long ago. So, comparatively speaking, so yeah, we may not necessarily want to listen to you and your moral standings, right? And so we have real world examples of that already. Yep. Um, well, Omen says some of the tenets of Christianity could be very easily mistaken for being cannibalistic. Ooh, ow, that's a hot take right there. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Maybe we might use that for like another week. Yeah, yeah. Red Dice. Oh, yep, yeah. Red Dice says, "Man, I'm from the UK. Our past history gets pretty dark." Yep, yep. And the UK passed. They were like, you know what? We tried taking over the world, and it's friggin' hard. It's expensive. Here, America, you do it now. And we were like, I don't see a problem with that. Let's put our footprint around the world too. Yeah. So so I will say that, maybe the orcs from their point of view have this entire time looked at modern society and been like, you know what? We don't want anything to do with you guys. Like that's why we're out here. Now here again is a bit of contention that's going to happen. Um and like I said, we already have an example of this where, okay, so orcs become player characters, and yeah, ooh, ow, Dead Man brings up the Children's Crusade. Yeah, yeah, we're gonna send kids with weapons to try to convert you to our religion and see what happens, right? How? So we we as humanity are pretty damn horrible, and to think of other people as being, you know, equally horrible. It's easy for me to stand on my soapbox and pronounce myself as being the end all and be all of a moral certainty, but it's pretty easy to poke a hole in me in a modern day because I'm probably pretty hypocritical about things that I don't realize, right? But here comes another problem with orcs and role playing games. Okay, so we insert them into as player characters. But like any culture that we've ever experienced ever, what population of that culture really is evil, right? Okay, so I guess I'm reneging on the everybody should be judged on their own merits. An example would be, let's say there's a group of orcs called the Black Talons, and they're cannibalistic. They are cannibalistic in a role playing sense, meaning like they eat elves and dwarves and their own kind. They're into raping and pillaging. They are, for every in every measurement of the word, they are all completely evil, and they have no mercy. Okay, is it okay to insert them in though that group, the Black Talons, into your game when orcs themselves have been incorporated into society, much like Klingons into future society of you know into Star Trek, right? Which I was going to hold that out for like a future Friday, right? If is will that still be a thing, or could that still be a thing? I don't know. I think yes, but again, that means nuance. That means maturity. Like, oh no, not all orcs are evil, but these orcs are, and that's where I think we can come with a lot of great stories. For example, the orc and half orc in the party that is tasked with um, hunting them down and killing them because they are committing these evil acts would make one look at themselves and the population that they are with as being like traitors, being pulled from both sides, feeling some kind of way with attacking your own kind, culturally and racially, in a role playing game. And I think that's the beauty of role playing, not necessarily trying to sugarcoat something. Uh, Red Dice says if you scratch the surface of any area of history, there's some dark, unpleasant stuff there. Yeah, a lot of which we'd call evil now, and I'm sure it'd be the same with our time when future people look back. Yeah, they're, for example, they might think video games and using sugarcane in our food was pretty damn evil, right? We don't know. We heck, we might even think that future humanity might even think pet ownership is brutal and evil and sadistic, right? We don't. Maybe the eating of meat. You know, I'm a red blooded American. I eat meat. I eat beef. I don't I don't feel any way about it. But maybe, in 100 years, humanity is like, "Poof, we have our stuff extruded out of a machine. Why would you actually want to kill a living thing? That we don't know. It's a possibility that I may be looked at as a bloody mouthed barbarian by our future humanity. So yeah, absolutely. So I want to go back to something that Deadman brought up, which was the Netflix movie Bright. And in the Netflix movie Bright, for those who don't know, spoiler alert, a little bit, whatever. In their world building, that elves and orcs have existed for a long time, up until modern day, which is I'm not going to get into the fight about whether Bright is really a Shadowrun world building movie or not. I understand there's no cybernetics, yada yada yada, but um, elves are the upper class, and orcs are considered, they're considered thugs and street people and lower class because of a past event in which they supported some like orc leader or something, like some orc chieftain that was going to ravage the countryside and was defeated, and so now they're living on the streets. And of course there is a parallel. Yes, the and thanks Omen. Omen's like, you're a government employee, you default to being a barbarian. Yes, more I think more undead rather than a barbarian. I would have to contend with you on that one. A little conflict on that one. I think we're more undead. But anyway, there is there is this idea that the parallel in that movie where the orcs were they're living on the street, and they're a parallel for like Southern California, wearing like gang colors and spray painting on walls, and you had the cops running around like looking at them like they're all criminalized because of their behavior. And then the orcs themselves are like, well, if you allowed us to intermingle and looked at us as equal, we wouldn't have to be criminals to survive, and so on. And there's that contention back and forth, depending on where you come from. Yeah, and Deadman says, and dwarves are mentioned as having existed in the recent past, at least. They actually look. You may not think that the movie itself is very good, but the world building is actually pretty decent. I mean, there's a centaur that they threw in there randomly. They did mention dwarves. There's a dragon that flies by overhead that no one mentions about in that movie. And when the orc becomes the partner of the police officer with Will Smith, and how Will Smith looks at him and the other police officers look at him, and then the orc is looked down upon by his own people when he's driving around. It is a like analogous to many black people in the United States. Oh, you're a sellout. Oh, you're trying to be uppity. Oh, you know, your people are criminalized, and you're just one of the good ones, or something. Like it's a whole. It for me, much like when I always talk about the sweet spot for me is not the end of the equation. It's not the end of the equation, but it's all the stuff that happens. It's all the hard things that happen till you get past that equal sign and get out on the other side of it, where I think that's a sweet spot for telling stories, where some for me, I think it would be okay for some gaming tables, despite orcs being pulled into society, to have them hate on orcs, throwing food at them and stuff when they walk down the street, or make up some kind of a racial epithet related to orcs, because rest of society is like, hey, we need things to change, and we need to embrace the orcs into our own society as orcs become join knights orders, and they go into the wizard schools, and they join religious organizations and things, and the common folk are like, I don't trust them, as the lady takes her coin purse and clutches it to her chest and crosses the street when the orc paladin who's neutral good, walks down the street, knowing that the orc took an oath to protect her life, and yet this woman is, I don't know, halfling woman is like scared of him or something like that. Is that threading a needle of like real world isms? Yes, I agree. Um, are there tables that might do those kind of things? I know I would. I wouldn't have a problem doing that. I do understand though, as a gaming company, needing to be explicit and as simplistic as possible, right? Because you don't know what you're promoting to other people. Like I said, there are people today in our own gaming community that are basically telling me that I don't belong, right? Game was made for white people. You shouldn't be in it. Uh, what? Right? This assumption that, well, only white people played the game, so therefore they're only there, is a fallacy. I've played these games over 40 years, and the fact that no one has decided to basically research how many people of color, how many people of different religions, how many people of different sexual orientations have been playing the game since its inception, you can't make assumptions that those people, because I'm classified. Wow, that's terrible language of mine. But I'm including myself in that comment, that since you don't know you out there don't know those statistics, how can we say that that hasn't been a major part of the game? So as a company, you want to sell to as many people, you want to include as many people. It's not a new thing. What they're doing is destroying an old standard, right? And that's what they're doing as a company. If I'm selling widgets, I want every person that can possibly buy my widget for any reason, and end of story, period, because I want to be successful. So if that means putting the advertisement of my widget in a different language, hell's yes. If it means making commercials and images of people of different races and religion and colors and ages, using my widget and having fun and smiling using my widget, yes, I'm going to do that because I want my widget to be successful. And knowing that um, this that there are people who are against, of all weird things, against orcs being pulled in as a player race, despite the fact that we already have, oh, I don't know, tieflings who literally have the blood of like fiendish beings from another world, who who they themselves are the embodiment of evil. That's just the weirdism to me. I don't get that at all. Um, anyway, Red Dice says, one thing I could never understand with Bright was how all these fantasy races existed, but history was so similar to the real world. Yeah, there's the guy who mentions the Alamo. Yeah, well, we don't want Bright colon the movie of I was about to say exploitation of explain-o-vision for 45 minutes to explain how the world is created, right? They had to give us, we are creative, but there's people who watch that movie who have zero idea about Dungeons and Dragons, right? So they had to make it as relatable as possible. So I think that's why they did it. I think that's why. Um, because there's a bunch of things in the movie where you're going like, okay, wait a minute. If these other races existed, like, wouldn't clothing be different? Wouldn't there be different languages used? Right? Like different, like not just slang, but like language itself would have been different as well. Those kind of things. Yeah, I get it. But yeah. Red Dice says, yeah, yes, I've been saying this for a while. WotC is a business, right? Wizards of the Coast, they need their product to appeal to as wide an audience as possible. It's just how businesses work. Of course they do. And now the issue is who. The thing is, when you delete, like Deadman brings up population breakdown, and yes, you may say, like, for example, there might be a majority of a population that has been, say, buying your product, right? However you want to divide up your population breakdown, but there's more money out there. When you're a business, okay, here's a perfect example. None of you guys remember a period of time when women um, were not just removed, but they were like nearly banned from popular sports here in the United States. And when I say banned from that, I mean like they were not announcers. They weren't allowed to be interviewers. There was no merchandise geared to them. There were no commercials geared to women. That's 50% of the population. Now, are you sure at that time they're like, oh, we're billionaires. I own sporting events and it's for guys and it's all guy related. And then somebody very intelligently was like, you do realize we could fake double our money by advertising and embracing the other 50% of the population. And then they did so and became even more billionaires, right? And we don't know what the population breakdown is in the role playing community. No one knows that. No one's researched. No one's asked me how long I've been in it. There've been people of color and religion and races and ethnicities and societal status that have been playing role playing games for a long time. And if you can't pull those numbers, then you can't presume a thing is at that level, right? Um, you don't know. Now for Bright, under Bright, I can't see the images. The Bright U.S. population breakdown. The world of Bright is populated by multiple intelligent races. In addition to these intelligent races, there are a number of magical creatures seen in Bright, such as a dragon flying over L.A. And what do they have here? 70% of the population is human. 0.1% centaur. How did I know that? 5% elf. They're the 5%ers. I can see them sitting up there. I can't read that. Ogre, 3%. Giant, 0.5%. Yeah. Pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Zigmus, you're gonna have to go back. But listen, Zigma says in the Discord, like, so there's a controversy around orcs and D&D. Anyone here able to bring me into the loop? Uh, yeah, I said that from the top of the show. I was like, um, there's a pretty sizable portion playing games today that are going like, what thing? I don't remember that being a thing. uh, yeah, I'm old enough to know that was a thing, but whatever. Um, yeah, Red Dice says when you're a business, it's all about the ducats. I'm presuming that's what the dollar signs mean. You got to pay your employees and keep the lights on, but that doesn't mean you can't provide a good product or service. The two aren't mutually exclusive. That's such a weirdism that people think that, or even business people think you can't that you can't provide a product or service that makes money and is also brings about the best experience for the people buying it, right? That's just a weirdism. Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. He's like, yeah, I just hopped in, but I remember seeing YouTube thumbnails about orcs and people being offended. I don't know, my head hurts. I I'm with you there, dude. I'm with you. Uh, us old grognards remember when orcs were they were the evil thing that you went out to the caves of chaos, leaving the people in the borderlands to go slaughter them. And over time, much like many of the other player races, like drow elves and tieflings and dragonborn being brought in as a player race, we've come to like look at them a little bit differently. Um, just because we're more sophisticated now, even our current culture today, like for example, one of the highest rated and watched movies today was The Joker, and the Joker, sorry, not the Joker, Joker, the movie. We got to see the development and origin of a bad guy, and we can both enjoy a feature film about the downfall of a person's mental state and still understand that the person is wrong, but understand where they're coming from, right? You know, we're pretty sophisticated as as humanity. Um, we just like to memify the things that we believe in, which is, I think, which I think is a detriment to our society. Right? We're more complicated than, you know, 140 or 280 characters. We are all complex human beings for good or bad, and none of us can claim that we can those without sin can throw the first stone. Most of us would be sitting there not throwing too many stones because we're pretty terrible to each other, at least at some point in our lives, right? Dead Man says, in the magical races, was that in Bright? Dragons, wyverns, fairies, griffins, giant wolves, and giant bats? Was that in there? Centaurs, dwarves, lizard men, goblins, Panahu? I don't know where that's from. Panahu? Is that a Aztec thing? I've never heard that term before. Panahu. Red Dice says, from my experience, there have been people of color and different ethnicities playing RPGs for the last 40 odd years, and I'm sure beyond. We had a very mixed of people when I was playing, even in my school days. Yeah, yeah. I don't. The While I don't think it's been malicious, um, people are far more comfortable with things that they're comfortable around, right? For example, food types, right? I'm not very comfortable. My palate is not used to eating, say, a lot of Mediterranean or like Indian or like Asian flavored foods. Now here in the United States, we've got a hodgepodge of those kind of things, but my palate isn't used to that, so I wouldn't that wouldn't be my first choice, right? I don't have anything against it, but there's a comfort in my Americanisms because I'm used to it. And the issue is that when people are pulled out of their comfort zone, sometimes they feel like they're being dragged out of their comfort zone. Okay, hey, these other people in my community don't listen to my music. They don't dress like I do. They have different opinions about the way things should be. Why are you forcing this on me? You're making me uncomfortable. And I that comfort, if let's say, for example, here, at least here in the States, like if your perception is the majority of those individuals are Caucasian, and the company is forcing you, forcing artwork down my throat and blurbs down my throat, and I don't understand, it could be a little bit uncomfortable for a lot of people, and that discomfort comes across to the people you're talking about as racist, sexist, um, uh, just plain evil. You may not be thinking it, but that's how that comes across. The words come out. The words come out, and hey, I'm uncomfortable. And then the word comes out on the other side, another person saying, hey, I hate you. The two can both exist at the same time and not be exclusive of one or the other, right? I could very easily, I don't know, call Zigmus. Hey, Zigmus, your name, I'm going to call you Poindexter. And Zigmus could say, that's not my name. That my name is Zigmus. It's not Poindexter. I could either say, oh, sorry, Zigmus. What's your name again? Oh, it's Zigmus. I apologize. Hey, how are you, Zigmus? I hope you're doing well. Or I could double down and go, I'm calling you Poindexter because you look like a Poindexter. You sound like a Poindexter, right? Like you see what I'm saying? Like, do we double down on, as our own role playing game community? Do we double down on the things that make us comfortable? Because I think, because hey, if you look and sound like a Poindexter, that's what you are. Or do I go do what a reasonable person does and go, oh, sorry about that. Let me first not do what I was doing and call you outside your name. So that's the first step. So I'm not going to call you Poindexter anymore. I'm going to call you Zigmus. And then the second thing is I'm going to apologize. Sorry about that, Zigmus. And then the third thing is, which, you know, oh, well, who are you and what are you about? That's what reasonable people do. They don't, this doubling down on get out of my game because you happen to be black, it is how I take it. despite the fact that they may not be thinking that's how they're putting it across. And so this orc situation of, WotC going, you know what? Yeah, we're going to change the way we portray orcs. Good on them for doing that. I've never had a problem with it. But their own art and their own words are not coinciding with what their policy is today. And I'm afraid of them deleting the history, but I'm happy for them going forward. I just wish that instead of deleting what they did, I wish they would put a blurb in front and go, oh, by the way, we don't think this anymore, but in the context of whatever our past products were, this is how they're looked at. Red Dice says, I work for a company that runs care homes. We have to charge for care and earn money to keep the company going, but that allows us to provide good care for people who can't look after themselves. All right, guys, we've come to the end of our broadcast for today. I hope you guys are able to join me for tomorrow. But just be aware that this might seem like a little bit of a sensitive subject, but we'll try to keep it normal and reasonable and all that good stuff. So, by the way, guys, thank you very much for joining me. And if you want to support the channel, just please like, share, subscribe, follow over on Twitch. Just be a supporter of the channel. I would really appreciate it. Everyone out there, have a great day. I will see thee later. Thank you very much for watching.